The final man standing is Max Baer Jr. The guy we all know as Jethro Bodine is 88 years old and finally ready to stop performing. Rumors about what actually transpired circulated for years. When the Beverly Hillbillies sets cameras ceased filming. Was our beloved grandmother secretly a terrifying person? At last, Max is correcting the record. Furthermore, Irene Ryan's reality is far more nuanced than a bowl of victuals. Today, Max Baer Jr., the last hillbilly, sits in his house, a far cry from the frenetic, laugh-track-filled world of television in the 1960s. He is more than merely an actor at the age of 88. A living time capsule, he is. He is the final member of the Beverly Hillbillies core four still alive. The renowned Irene Ryan, Donna Douglas, and Buddy Ebsen are no more. The memories become far more burdensome when you're the last person standing. When others see him, they still assume he's Jethro Bodine, the big, silly boy hoping to become a double-knot spy or a brain surgeon. However, Max was always far more astute than the persona he portrayed. Being the only survivor has altered his outlook after decades of protecting the show's legacy. Out of respect, he kept the set's mysteries hidden for years. For the admirers who continue to watch the reruns daily, he didn't want to spoil the magic. However, the necessity for PR-friendly responses tends to fade over time. Max is aware that the true tale could be lost forever if he doesn't share it now. He has read the books and watched the documentaries, and he is fed up with the polished, phony depictions of what happened behind the scenes. The greatest riddle of all? The actress who portrayed Moses, Granny, and Daisy. She was known to the world as the fierce little powerhouse who used a wooden spoon and a pot of moonshine to keep the clan in check. Behind those wire-rimmed glasses and that gray wig, however, was a lady Max knew better than most. Together, they spent countless hours in the sweltering heat of the stage lights and the dirt of the studio backlit. Max recalls the tobacco odor, the razor-sharp tongue capable of slicing a director in two, and the lonely heart of a lady who had sacrificed everything for show business. He's prepared to discuss the conflict, the late-night rehearsals, and the times the director cried, cut, and the nice old lady act disappeared. Being honest is more important here than being cruel. Now is the moment to discuss the true Irene. While the studio saw a force of nature, the outside world saw a loving grandmother. Finding Granny. It was a desperate search to find the ideal candidate to play Daisy Moses, not just a casting call. The creator of the program, Paul Henning, had a huge hit on his hands, but he realized that if he didn't find a woman who could be both adorable and terrifying, the entire thing would fail. The character was described as a small powerhouse. A woman with the interior might have a goods train but the appearance of being blown over by a breeze. Numerous actresses were considered, but none of them were a good fit. Some were simply playing old, while others were overly nice. Paul was not interested in a costumed actress. He desired a natural force. Irene Ryan comes in. Irene was already an industry veteran when she arrived for the audition. She had worked in radio and vaudeville for years, developing a sense of humorous timing that could be used to shave. However, Hollywood is a difficult environment for an older lady, and Irene was aware that this might be her last major opportunity. She seized control of the room rather than simply entering it. Max recalls learning about that initial audition. Irene didn't request the role. She used her performance to demand it. Granny was more than simply a sidekick, she realized. She was the family's main driver. She and Buddy Ebsen clicked right away during their screen test. Irene was the spark plug that kept Buddy, who was tall and easygoing, on his toes. However, there was a catch. The executives of the network were concerned. Irene might be too much, they worried. Or maybe not sufficiently granny-like in real life. Irene was a sophisticated woman off camera, you see. She didn't look at all like a mountain woman, and she enjoyed her seclusion and sense of style. She needed to demonstrate her ability to change. She left the Hollywood glitz behind, went home, picked up an old, tattered outfit, and put her hair back into a tight, untidy bun. The bosses didn't even recognize her when she returned. The show really started at that point. Irene's commitment to the part was strong from the beginning, according to Max. She was aware that Granny's complete plausibility was necessary for the comedy to succeed. The joke was ruined if the audience realized she was merely a wig-wearing actress. She defended the integrity of the character, frequently battling with authors when she thought a phrase didn't sound like it would be said by a hill lady. She had more in mind than just getting paid. Her goal was to create a legend. The younger actors were unprepared for the grit she brought to the set. It didn't take Max long to realize that he was working with a masterclass in survival, not simply a co-star. However, it was only half the fight to look the part. The true key was to stay in it. The mask of makeup Irene Ryan sat in a chilly caravan every morning long before the sun rose over the Bel Air hills. Irene wasn't really that old when the show began, something that most people are unaware of. Despite being in her late 50s, she was required to portray a woman who appeared to have undergone an 80-year smokehouse cure. The process of transition was harsh. It was more than a fast wig and powder dab. Heavy grease paint, spirit gum, and deep lines painted into her flesh to catch the light were all part of the hour-long agony. Max recalls seeing her come, appearing to be a well-groomed Hollywood professional, and then witnessing her gradually disappear beneath layers of aging. Irene loved the outcome, but she detested the process. She was aware that Granny's mask was her most powerful tool. Irene Ryan vanished as soon as the wire-rimmed spectacles were balanced on her nose and that wig was secured. Her stance even shifted. She would pick up her characteristic frenzied pace and hunch her shoulders. Max used to make jokes about how the cosmetics functioned like a battery. She seemed to have more vitality the more gaunt she appeared. However, the hefty chemicals caused damage. It was tough to spend 12 hours a day wearing that heavy theatrical makeup in the scorching California weather. Her eyes were tired and her skin was rough. Irene refused to lighten the load, even if it was physically uncomfortable. She maintained that the makeup was realistic and grungy. She had no desire to be a charming TV grandmother. She desired to be the resilient woman who made it through the Ozarks. Max witnessed how her treatment on set was altered by this mask. Even the directors were a little scared of her when she was in character. She kept the set on schedule by using that fear. Being an expert, she had no tolerance for anyone who weren't ready. She also experienced a peculiar form of anonymity because to the mask. At the end of the day, Irene could walk through a grocery store without anyone noticing that she was America's most famous grandmother. She treasured that. She led two lives, one as the Spitfire in the calico dress and the other as a glitzy, affluent woman. Max was completely fascinated by this daily act of disappearing. He came to see that the mask concealed more than simply her age. She became a mother because of the bond she forged off camera, but the costume made her a fame. Jethro and Granny's relationship. Jethro and Granny were a comic goldmine on screen. You had this little, nimble woman who wasn't scared to box his ears, and this big, tall child who wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. The core of the presentation was their physical humor. Max had a lot of energy, strength, and youth. Irene, on the other hand, was an experienced professional who was adept at playing off his stature. However, something far more profound was taking place away from the cameras and the enormous home set. Irene became Max's support system as he navigated the unexpected surge of fame while he was in his 20s. She took him under her wing in a way that transformed his life. She didn't just act like his grandmother. Max recalls learning the ins and outs of show business from Irene. Irene was whispering in his ear about lighting, camera angles, and how to save his career while everyone else laughed at the jokes. Others were too preoccupied with making fun of the Jethro persona to notice the promise she saw in him. After a take, she would pull him aside and advise him whether he needed to work on his timing or if he was being lazy. It was a mentorship of rough love. She refrained from blowing smoke up his skirt. She warned him if he made a mistake. However, Max valued her small sign of approval more than any fanboy if he executed a scene flawlessly. On the other hand, their relationship was much more special. They would frequently eat lunch together while seated away from the crew's cacophony. Max was able to observe the true woman during those calm times when the Granny character would vanish. She spoke to him about the loneliness that frequently accompanies becoming a star, the heartbreak of the business, and her years spent touring as a vaudeville performer. Max then turned to become her guardian. Max would frequently carry Irene through the muddy areas of the backlit or make sure she had a chair ready the moment the lights went out because she was so small and the filming schedule was so demanding. She became his intellect, and he became her muscle. There was an authentic love that was impossible to manufacture for the cameras. Today, Max acknowledges that over those 9 years, he most likely spent more time with Irene than with his own family. They created a look, gesture, or shorthand language that conveyed their identical thoughts to each other. Irene was the one who advised Max to accept the dumb guy stereotype that began to accompany him, but never to believe it. She reminded him that a very clever actor was needed to play stupid well. Max remained faithful to her until the very end, and she stood up for him in front of the producers when they tried to push him too hard. But it wasn't all somber. Together, they had a great time. In between takes, Max would laugh uncontrollably at Irene's cruel, sarcastic sense of humor. She enjoyed making light of how ridiculous their success was. Here they were, two actors earning more money than they could have ever imagined while posing as impoverished mountain people. Irene is credited by Max with keeping him grounded. She demonstrated to him that it was possible to be a huge celebrity and still be a professional who knew every word and arrived on time. She was more than simply a co-star to Max. In the chaotic world of Hollywood in the 1960s, she was the anchor that prevented his ship from slipping away. However, a darker reputation was beginning to emerge behind the connection and laughing. The challenging label. When a lady understands what she wants, there's a term that's frequently used in the realm of classic television. Challenging. The whispers began as the Beverly Hillbillies rose to the top of the charts. Irene Ryan was described as a mobile terror. They claimed that she was difficult to please, had a short fuse, and was demanding. Max heard everything because he was the person closest to her. He witnessed how some of the crew members would roll their eyes when she began behaving out, and how guest stars would shudder when they had to perform a scene with her. Max, however, views those rumors differently. Irene wasn't being challenging to him. In a room of amateurs, she was acting like a pro. Irene was a member of the vaudeville old school. You didn't eat in that world if you weren't flawless. Each and every day, she brought that same vitality to the set. She didn't have any tolerance for anybody who didn't take the craft seriously, forgot their lines, or arrived late. Max recalls instances where a director would attempt to give her a note that didn't make sense for the role, but Irene would quickly cut them off. She wasn't acting like a diva. She knew Granny better than anyone on the globe, which is why she was doing it. Like a mother bear, she guarded that persona. She pointed out any sloppy writing. She forced them to fix any poor lighting. Max gives a straightforward explanation for the rumors that she snapped at the media or was aloof to her admirers. Irene was worn out. She was an elderly woman who put in 16-hour workdays while wearing irritating clothes and a bulky wig. Unlike some actresses, she lacked an off switch. She usually concentrated on the next 3 pages of dialogue she needed to commit to memory when the cameras paused. Max realized that moodiness was simply intense focus. She wasn't there to win a popularity contest or make friends. She was there to perform America's greatest show. She carried the burden of the show's success on her tiny shoulders, which can cause anyone to become a little frenzied. Additionally, Max notes that the industry was exclusively male at the time. Buddy Epson was referred to as a leader if he made demands. Irene was said to as difficult if she asked for a change. Max saw her use a lot of grit and a harsh tongue to deal with that double standard. To receive half the respect, she understood she needed to be twice as fierce. She blurred the boundaries between the character and the lady to keep others guessing, sometimes using her grandmother persona to achieve her goals. It was a strategy for survival. She had worked hard for 40 years to get to the top, and she had no intention of being brought down by a sloppy production assistant or a poor script. In retrospect, Max understands that the show's longevity was precisely due to Irene's reputation for being stern. Everyone had to live up to the high standards she set. If you were standing next to Irene Ryan, you couldn't be half in. You have to give it your all for her. Because she always gave it her all. Max failed to spot a diva. He saw a woman who wouldn't accept anything less than the best. He respected her for it back then, and he still does. She wasn't challenging. She was simply in charge. The body was beginning to show warning symptoms, but the iron will was still there. The disease in secret. The atmosphere on set began to change as the show approached its final seasons. Max was the first to notice it. The fire in Irene's eyes was flickering, but she was still hitting her targets and snapping out her lines. The bulky outfits seemed to hang off her small frame more than usual, and she was losing weight. In typical Irene way, however, she remained silent. She belonged to a generation that didn't voice complaints or discuss weakness. Being ill seemed like a luxury that she couldn't afford. Hundreds of people in her crew were counting on her to arrive, and she was not going to disappoint them. Max recalls the calm times in between shots when Irene would collapse into her chair, appearing utterly exhausted. She would come back to life like a professional athlete the moment the assistant director yelled, "Places." Watching the shift was horrifying. Even though she insisted she wasn't hungry, Max began to watch her more closely and would frequently bring her water or make sure she had some food. Irene made it quite plain that the topic was off limits, even though he suspected something wasn't right. She didn't want sympathy, and she most certainly didn't want the network executives to start worrying about the health of their celebrity. In actuality, Irene was coping with the early phases of the heart problems and stroke that would ultimately claim her life. However, she dismissed it as growing older at the moment. The granny persona served as a shield for her. People simply assumed it was part of the act if she appeared a little weaker or moved a little more slowly. Max saw right through it. When she wasn't being filmed, he observed how she would stabilize herself by holding onto the back of a chair. It was a masterclass in sheer determination. For the sake of the show, she was practically holding herself together. Irene didn't slow down even as the series ended in 1971. If anything, she exerted more force. She traveled with her act before landing a huge Broadway role in the musical Pippin. Max was quite anxious. He was aware that performing in a live theater production was difficult, even for a young person, much less a woman in her 70s who was silently struggling. Irene, however, refused to listen. She wanted to show that she was more than a wig-wearing hillbilly. She overcame the discomfort, lightheadedness, and exhaustion while keeping her secret hidden from the general population. Up until the point at which she passed out on stage. Her bank account was a different story, but she concealed her suffering to make everyone laugh. Wealth and notoriety. The Beverly Hillbillies was more than just a television program by the middle of the 1960s. It was a phenomena. In her decades of touring, Irene Ryan had never experienced such wealth. The majority of people thought she lived like Granny, perhaps in a peaceful home with a vegetable garden. In actuality, the opposite was true. Irene liked living the high life. She knew exactly what to do with the large checks that began to come in because she had lived out of luggage and played small clubs for years. She drove fancy cars, purchased a high-rise condo, and dressed elegantly as soon as the calico outfit was taken off. Max recalls how almost comical the difference was between Irene's real life and her life on television. Irene was building a smart investing portfolio while Granny was yelling about pot liquor and possum innards. She was a very astute financial manager. She didn't waste her energy on pointless things. She put money into it. She rose to become one of Hollywood's wealthiest women, but she never showed off her wealth in an ostentatious manner. Max felt as though she was finally receiving compensation for all of the years she had to struggle in vaudeville. She was aware that money in Hollywood meant more than just luxury, it also meant independence and power. But fame was a little more nuanced. Irene couldn't go anyplace without people assuming she was the grandmother character because the show was so popular. Max remembers how people would come up to her and be really surprised to see that she wasn't the vivacious grandma from the movie, but rather a smart, well-dressed, and somewhat reserved woman. The fact that she didn't speak in such high-pitched rasp in real life even disappointed some. Irene responded to it with a combination of tact and a don't mess with me mindset. Her fans were important to her, but her privacy was even more important. She didn't think she needed to be on all the time. She took advantage of her notoriety. She was aware that being a grandmother allowed her to sit at tables that she had previously been unable to access. However, she also spent that money on unreported activities. Till a long time later. She was unobtrusively giving, lending a hand to crew members in need or making donations to charities close to her heart. She was viewed by Max as a lady who had at last taken control of a town that typically ate people alive and then spat them out. At a time when most people were being forced into retirement, she had reached the summit of the mountain. Irene saw the money as a prize for a job well done, and the celebrity as a job. She never allowed her own value to be determined by the hillbilly brand. Despite portraying the most anti-Hollywood role, Max frequently claims that Irene was the most Hollywood person on the set. She played the game to win and had the best understanding of it of anyone. From a touring entertainer to a multi-millionaire celebrity, she relished every penny of her fortune. She could not purchase additional time with the money, but it did buy her comfort. The final curtain, neither a peaceful room nor a hospital bed, marked the end. The attention was just where Irene wanted it to be. Irene didn't go to a rocking chair after the Beverly Hillbillies concluded. She made her way to Broadway. She was able to showcase the singing and dancing ability she had spent 50 years honing when she was cast as Berta in the musical Pippin. Max observed from a distance, feeling both scared and proud. He was aware that she was straining herself to the breaking point. She would get up on a trapeze every night and perform the song No Time at All, which is about living life to the fullest before it's too late. The irony was nearly unbearable. The engine finally failed in March 1973. In the midst of a performance, Irene had a stroke. After being hurried off stage, she continued to fight for a few weeks. The harm had already been done. Max was devastated to learn that she had died at the age of 70. They had lost Granny to the world. Max felt as though he had lost the woman who had taught him how to live in a world where he was just a joke. He recalls the funeral as a bizarre occasion when their TV family's reality finally collapsed. Max said nothing, while many members of the public were in mourning. He didn't want to fake a cry or give the media a soundbite. The woman who used to sit in the mud with him and discuss real life was the object of his grief. He considered how she had worked right up until the very end, offering the public her life. It had a noble quality, but it was also really depressing. Max questioned whether she would ever be able to just be Irene because she had lived so much of her life as someone else. The hillbilly era came to an end with the death of Irene Ryan. It felt like the magic was gone without her. At that moment, Max understood that the show was about more than just an oil-rich family. Irene brought the fire to the screen. The glue was her. He began to feel the burden of being a survivor as he glanced at the vacant chair where she used to sit for makeup. Even though he was young and had a long life ahead of him, he was certain that he would never meet a spouse like her. Irene had one last trick under her sleeve, even though her illustrious career had come to an end. Not only did she leave behind a cash account, but she also made it possible for her name to endure long after the reruns ceased to air. Max was aware that Irene would remain in charge even after she passed away. Just as meticulously as she had prepared her auditions, she had also prepared her exit. She ensured that the next generation had a place before leaving the stage for the last time. The legacy Irene Ryan chose to adopt every failing actor in America because she didn't have any children of her own. The world saw how much she loved the craft when her will was read. She established the Irene Ryan acting scholarships using a sizable portion of the money she had made from the show and her astute investments. She had no desire for a museum or an ostentatious memorial. She aspired to provide the tuition for children who had her sense of fervor from her vaudeville days. That was always lovely to Max. She gave the future a more heartfelt gift than nearly any other celebrity of her era, despite the fact that she was occasionally referred to as Chile or challenging. These scholarships are among the most distinguished honors available to young theater students today. Because the actress who portrayed Granny chose to give back, thousands more performers have gotten their start. Max is thrilled that her name is still mentioned in theater departments and college hallways all around the nation. It is a heritage that is entirely related to Talone and has nothing to do with possum pie. It validates what Max has always known. Irene was a dedicated artist who carried her creations with her. She wished that the next Irene Ryan would have a marginally simpler journey than her own. Max has had to carry the legacy of the show itself. He has witnessed the transformation of the Beverly Hillbillies from an absurd comedy to a part of American folklore. Sometimes he sees the repeats and is amazed at how well Irene still performs. She is not a parody. She is an actual person. Every frame shows the love, the rage, and the roughness. Max is aware that Irene will continue to exist as long as the show airs anywhere in the world. She continues to keep Jethro in check and outwit Mr. Drysdale. Much of Max's final years have been devoted to ensuring that the true Irene is remembered. He serves as a link between the present and the black and white past. He enjoys sharing the tales of her kindness and intelligence. He wouldn't have it any other way, even if he is aware that his own notoriety is inextricably linked to her. The scholarship fund is more than just money to Max. It's the last evidence that the stern woman on set has the largest heart in Hollywood. Her name is preserved by the scholarships, but her spirit is preserved by Max's recollections. For more, please subscribe to our channel if you like this in-depth look. I appreciate you watching.